Now in its third year, it's a Yank on the Footy with Craig Wessels, talking about the greatest game on the face of the earth. Sit back and enjoy, everybody. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 188 of A Yank on the Footy. I'm Craig Wessels, coming to you from Sandusky, Ohio. Thanks for giving this episode a listen. In just a few moments, I will be joined by Daniel Cherny from Code Sports. Great online sports magazine. Now, folks, don't forget that if you are interested in having your club get featured and get a shout-out during an upcoming episode, drop me a note via email or shoot me a note on my socials. I love being able to give a shout-out to clubs and learn a little bit about the geography of the game by diving into the history of these clubs. Today's club of the episode is being sponsored by MickAussie.tv. MickAussie.tv is run by Kim Harrison, or as we call him here in North America, Mick Aussie. Mick has spent the last 2 decades plus running his sports comedy channel, talking about the NFL, the CFL, the AFL, as well as other sports. He also appears regularly on Sports Grid TV, and he was a terrific footy player in his own right in South Australia, as well as in the Northern Territory. Now, this week's club of the episode are the Sunbury Lions of the Ballarat Football League. The Lions were formed back in 1879, and they won their first of 25 premierships in 1892. And one of the alums of the Lions is none other than Essendon's Matty Prespakis. The club is over 30 different teams competing in all sorts of different levels of football and netball. And they play their home games at the Clark Oval on Riddell Road. And following their final home game of the fixture this year on the 20th of August, the club is going to be hosting their last person standing contest with a grand prize of $500. So if you're in the area, if you're a supporter of the club or this league, check with the club for tickets, and best of luck to the Lions going forward as they close out their 2022 fixture. Now, ladies and gentlemen, before we dive into my discussion with Daniel, I do want to encourage you to go back and take a listen to episode 186 if you haven't done so yet. I do hope you'll give it a listen. As I mentioned in that episode, the last 10 minutes of it or so, it's only about a 20-minute episode. The first half of it is a little tribute to my uncle who passed away on the 8th of July. Just an absolutely wonderful gentleman. But the second half of it is a bit of an appeal for folks with regards to an upcoming birthday for someone, for my mother, quite frankly. And she's hoping to get as many different birthday cards from around the world sent to her with a photograph of something that makes the sender happy. A sunset, their favorite club, their puppy, whatever it might be. So hopefully you'll consider helping me out with that. That'd be great. I will put the mailing address for that in the show notes for this episode. I did get the first card in the mail a couple of days ago, so hoping to have a much bigger stack of those to be able to go forward here. So let's go ahead and dive into my chat with Daniel Cherny, and we'll come back and we'll close out the episode after that. All right, ladies and gentlemen, my guest this episode is a Melbourne-based sports writer. He spent 8 years with The Age, has covered Test cricket around the world, has been recognized for his writing in both footy and in cricket. He currently writes for Code Sports. I'd like to welcome Daniel Cherny to the podcast. Daniel, thanks for getting up this morning and sitting down with me, sir.
Craig, pleasure to be with you.
I truly appreciate it. I'm a subscriber to the organization that you work with right now, Code Sports, and you had a really interesting article that came out a couple of days ago that I reached out to you and wanted to touch on, and it's dealing with kind of like homesickness, if you will, in footy. And it's something that has really piqued my interest as an American footy fan, because you wrote in the article how the AFL kind of looks at the NFL and the NBA as far as contracts and that sort of thing. But I wanted to ask you about a couple of things related to that. But for those folks who have not read your article yet, can you want to give us a little quick synopsis of it?
Sure. So I did a bit of a deep dive into what's called what's sort of broadly and loosely called the go home factor in the AFL and I suppose Australian sport more broadly, but particularly in the AFL, where players tend to not exclusively, and certainly there are a lot of players that continue to play interstate away from where they grow up, but there is sort of a bit of a phenomenon where in the AFL. After a certain while, when players get drafted to interstate, and given that most of the clubs are in Victoria, and most of the players come from Victoria, or certainly disproportionately so, that they tend to request trades or request moves back to their home states at some stage. As I said, not exclusively. There are plenty of players who continue to play their careers away from where they were born, where they grew up, but there's a reasonable phenomenon where players it tends to happen every year. A handful of players, they tend to be some of the more high-profile moves around trade period and free agency. There's also a bit of a phenomenon where before the draft, players, the draft is supposedly and broadly is national, and players can go anywhere, and once they nominate, they can go anywhere. Players, a handful of players, certainly not the majority, but a handful of players, I suppose, make it reasonably clear that they don't want to go interstate, and obviously it's up to the clubs at the end to make the decision as to whether they recruit them, because once you enter the draft, you have to go wherever, officially you have to go wherever you're asked, but wherever you're picked up. But the messaging can be quite strong from some of these players that they don't want to go for various reasons. So I just did a bit of a deep look at this broad phenomenon. There are certain clubs that are affected more than others, in particular the expansion clubs. The Giants, probably most of all, but really the New South Wales and Queensland clubs, because they come from the non-traditional footy AFL states, where there aren't as many players who are natives of those states. So inevitably, you're going to bring in a lot of players that come from interstate, and therefore are more susceptible, more vulnerable, prone to this sort of go-home factor. So there's a bit of a close look at it. I don't profess to have the answers as to how to solve it or whether there is a solution, but it was just a bit of an examination of the issues and some of the challenges and what really happens behind the scenes.
Yeah, the one I remember, and you have some photographs in there of Taylor Brunn, I think I'm pronouncing his last name correctly, that is you kind of the poster child for it, I think is how it was described there, that, he said he didn't look happy, but, as he said later on, it was more of a stoic look he was very serious about things. And then Archie Perkins was somewhat vocal about not wanting to go interstate, but would and I know zoning used to be a thing, and that's kind of gone by the wayside. But since it isn't a national competition right now, zoning probably would not work terribly well. That would really hamstring clubs like GWS and the Suns and the Lions and the Swans, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would. I suppose it depends on on which zones they each received. But the zoning dates back. And look, at one level, we do still have an element of zoning through the Northern Academies, and the draft is not, and clearly you're all across it, but perhaps some of your American listeners who are newer to the sport and its nuances and intricacies may grapple to get their heads around it. Certainly, I think even for the casual follower of footy here, it can be a bit convoluted. That there are bidding systems with next generation academies, which are for players of sort of multicultural backgrounds, and which were themselves brought in as sort of almost a make-up for Victorian clubs that were annoyed about the Northern Academies, where these clubs have priority access. So there are sort of zones at the moment, but where clubs have priority access, but there are mechanisms in place where they have to bid on these players. So effectively, they have to still pay close to market rate to get these players. But historically, zoning, the thing that's always worth remembering about the AFL is that it did evolve from the VFL. It is really it's a Victorian competition that, and I'm sure you're across this, but it's a Victorian competition that that turned into an Australian competition. And if you were designing a national football competition now, you probably wouldn't have 10 of the 18 teams within one state, but that's just historically how it's evolved. So historically, the Victorian clubs would each have zones, both metropolitan and within metropolitan Melbourne, and then sort of within regional Victoria, which would be their catchment areas. Mm-hmm. But that sort of went by the wayside. I think by sort of the early 90s, as the national draft came in. That came in 86, the national draft. And there was sort of probably a period where there was a bit of a crossover. And look, the rules with the draft have continues to be fine tuning around certain things. The bidding system was a big one with academies and points, and each pick has a point system. But broadly speaking, zoning. I mean, I suppose in when you look at it, trying to find solutions, I can see where you're coming from. Find a solution to the go home factor. Well, maybe each club having a zone would be an answer, but it probably wouldn't. I think there'd be too many. There'd be too many kinks with it. It would be hard to have a fair distribution of talent. There'd be real aberration from year to year. I mean, even back in the 70s and 80s, there were zones that were sort of probably seen to be perceived as stronger recruiting zones compared to others, and some clubs had leg ups. But more to the point, as you touched on, yes, that the Giants, the Suns, even the Swans and the Lions would be, I suppose, negatively impacted if they didn't get to recruit. If they had to solely rely on New South Wales and Queensland talent, and probably the clubs that would probably benefit more than any would be the South Australian and Western Australian clubs, because I think they somewhat, not extraordinarily, but sort of relative to the amount of clubs in the league, they have more players from those states.
Makes sense. Yep.
Sort of 20% more, so they would get the pick of the SA and WA talent, and in theory would do better. So it's an interesting thought, but I don't think it's going to go back to that. So
along with this, and a lot of these young men that are and women now in the AFLW that are coming into this game and playing it at the highest level at 18, 19 years of age. But a lot of these younger players that are coming in, when they're signing their initial contract, it's just a 2-year contract. Do you think that initial contract should be longer for clubs? Because you have clubs like GWS, like Gold Coast, who've had a tough time retaining players. Because I'm not sure how familiar you are with the NFL's contract system. Like for their first round picks, they have every one of them signed to a 4-year contract, and then they have like a 5th-year option where if the club decides, okay, you're good enough, we want to keep you, we're going to sign you on for this 5th year, or they may say, we're not going to pick up your 5th year, prove it to us in your 4th year to get a 5th-year deal from us.
Yeah, no, it's quite a stark contrast, and I mean it's interesting because as you sort of touched on, I sort of wrote in the piece, the AFL try to, in a lot of respects, have modelled things on the way the NFL, maybe to a lesser extent the NBA, have done things in terms of draft, salary cap, flexible fixturing, just a lot of even the TV rights, glitz and glamour, a lot of the sort of points to an extent where you can probably be they can probably be accused of being a bit Americanizing the game a bit too much, but
sorry about that.
That's okay. I'm sorry, and that's not a slight on on you or your nation, but not intended to be. But look, there has been discussion about extending the first round draftee contract. It's one from 2 years, because it doesn't, and this was particular. It probably hasn't been a talking point as much for maybe a few years. I think the concessions given to the Suns in 2019, whereby they got pick 1, which effectively meant they got pick 1 and 2, plus they got some other sort of sweeteners, later draft picks and priority access to the Northern Territory Darwin zone. They where they picked up Matt Rowell and Noah Anderson together, who were best mates from Melbourne, and that was sort of a bit of a opportunistic move from the AFL, which is fair enough too. But it's an interesting discussion point. Certainly, I think the New South Wales and Queensland clubs would be happy for this to come into place. Would allow them a better chance of sort of build a case to keeping these players beyond the 2-year deals. Now, to be fair, there's probably not actually that many. There's probably not that many players that that end up leaving after their initial clubs necessarily after 2 years.
Right.
And
right.
even I know some of the even some of the sort of more prominent management companies tend to encourage their players to at least give these clubs 4 years, but so extend. And you will often see players. But what's interesting is that a lot of the time they will do so, but they will do so leveraging the fact that there is this sort of retention concern, and will end up sort of fleecing these clubs for extremely lucrative 3rd and 4th year contracts, well above the sort of average wage for a player of that age.
Yeah.
So
certainly if you can get it,
exactly.
Go.
No, it's capitalist society. So
there you go.
So so that has itself trickle down effects. Look, it's a discussion point. It was something I raised with several people when making these calls with agents and clubs for this story. Look, I don't see it happening just because the players have a lot of power, and players, like anyone, are more likely to ask for greater freedoms rather than restrictions and restraints. I think it would need to come with a reasonable trade-off. There's talk about restricting, cutting back the free agency, or bringing in the free agency threshold from 8 years to 6 years, which, and I believe in American sports, pardon my ignorance, but I believe 8 years is sort of quite extreme for in terms of relative to the free agency threshold for some of the US sports.
Well, like in the NFL, for example, if you're a first round player, and if they've played the first 5 years of their contract, then the club has the option to use what they call they get to have one player that they get to use the franchise tag on, where they end up paying them significantly more to stay, but they can do that, I think, for 2 seasons. So I guess that in that case, I think it'd be like 7 years after that initial drafting, then they could be an unrestricted free agent. Yeah, which is interesting. So I mean, here you get to, at the earliest, you get to 8 years to be an unrestricted free agent, and even then, that's only within the top 25%. So that the top 25% of players on a club's list are actually considered restricted free agents after when they're the first time they fall out of contract after 8 years. So it can take, for an elite player to become an unrestricted free agent, you're talking at least 10 years. I mean, to be fair, restricted free agents tend to be able to move. So there's a bit of a trade-off that could potentially happen. Could you go from, is it free agency after 6 years or 6 or 7 years, and the first round draft picks go to 3? I suspect if you were going to have, there'd have to be some give and take, and whether the league clubs would all agree to that. Self-interest would obviously be right.
Obviously rules the roost with all these things. So you've got to always try to ascertain what the agendas are. But it's certainly a topic that I think is worth discussing and interesting. Yeah.
Okay. I had a couple of other things that I wanted to touch on with regards to this season, but then also your career a little bit as well. Who's going to take the 8th spot? Because I'm not convinced anybody actually wants it.
The recent performances of some of these teams would suggest as much. Look, it's a good question.
Paddy Ryder's going to be out for the next month. That really hurts the Saints.
Yeah, the way the Saints are playing the last, best part of the last 6 weeks, it'd be very, very hard to see them making it. Just the form's just been too poor. The Bulldogs, hit their straps. Well, they were a bit better. They looked at the straps. They were a fair bit better on Friday night, but they've got a tough run home and still have to. Look. What's the old adage about possession? I think possession is 9/10 of the law, as they say.
Yes.
So I think I'd probably still back Richmond in, and the fact that they've, it's not like they've been playing terribly. They've been losing close games.
Right.
So I'd probably give them. Look, I think Gold Coast have quite an accommodating fixture, and are certainly still in the frame. Look, I would probably say Richmond, but I think Gold Coast would actually be, despite the loss to Western, they'd actually be the next best chance. I can't see St Kilda making it with their difficult fixture. The Bulldogs are an outside chance, but it's a tough run home. Port Adelaide, real uphill task from here,
right.
and I think I've touched on them all now. So so you're right.
I did see somebody post that technically Essendon is still alive mathematically, which I don't know. Uh, I don't think
I
they're
did.
going to get there.
No, I did. I did see that post. And to be fair, they are in good form, but I think they've from what were they 3-11? I think they might have left it around a bit.
They. So is your grand final prediction still in place? Are your clubs that you tipped for the grand final at the start of this year still in place? Mine is a wreck, I think.
Good question. I'm trying to think who I actually tipped for the grand final. Look, I think I tipped Melbourne and Brisbane at the start of the year. I'm pretty sure. And they're both, clearly they're both still thereabouts, but in recent form, it's hard to sort of. Geelong are playing some pretty irresistible footy, notwithstanding that they've been shaky in the finals. Yeah, no, you are. I can see you're a Cats fan. You'd be the second biggest overseas Cats fan that I know, because my uncle who lives in Israel is an expat, but he's a mad Geelong fan.
Okay.
And he calls up SEN. His name's Dave from Israel.
Okay.
He's it's neither here nor there. But look, I would probably, at the moment, I think Geelong probably deserve premiership favouritism. I mean, it's a fleeting thing, and what does that even mean?
Right.
Exactly. It's just, I think though that they will, especially with a pretty soft run home from here, and they've done well, but they've got a reasonably accommodating fixture. I think they'll probably finish top. Hard to see them missing the top two. Now, admittedly, they don't get a final in Geelong unless there's some sort of extreme change of plans from the AFL. But
it's not going to happen.
No, I wouldn't have thought so. So no, they give themselves every chance. Look, at the moment, I'd probably be predicting a Melbourne and Geelong grand final. I really liked Fremantle but that loss to Sydney sets them back a fair bit. I thought that was a really big game for them. If Fremantle had won that, I probably would have them almost as the second seed behind Geelong, again, for whatever that means. But
right.
Look, I think Melbourne and Geelong at 1 and 2, the prospect of both playing finals in Victoria at the moment, as it stands, I think they'll probably play in the grand final. I think Brisbane have been very shaky, haven't done much this year to convince me that they've improved. I like Fremantle. I think if they, on any given day, they can beat anyone, but I think unless they can somehow snare a top 2 spot, it's a big ask.
Okay.
And then from there, Carlton have been good, but you probably aren't going to make the top 4 now. I think on any given day, could see them not their best is very good, but could see them knocking off anyone. But this is a tough from outside the top 4. Sydney just a bit too inconsistent in my view, and Collingwood, a great story this year, and all credit to them. But I just think. They just keep on winning close games, but I think when you look at their percentage, it probably suggests that they're a little bit inflated in terms of their ladder position. They're a good team. I don't think they're a great team. I think they'll be they'll be in the finals. I could see them, even making a prelim if all things went well, but I just can't see them winning it.
Okay, so I had a couple more things before we wrap up here. What got you into sports journalism? How did you get the bug? Who inspired you?
Good question. I think I always, it probably dates back to being a kid. I think I just naturally, from when my dad first took me to watch a footy game, St Kilda supporter growing up, and I suppose still am, but not quite as passionate as I was back in the day. But when I just loved it from a young age, from 5 or 6, and would sort of absorb all the footy TV shows and read and game coverage, and there was less of it back then, but radio, newspaper, and in the early days of the internet and all that. So when we started getting the internet, I'd go on sports sites and that. So I just think I naturally liked it. I think I probably I enjoyed reading as a kid, and so I think it was naturally reasonably literary, and had a reasonable flair for it. So there's probably always a bit of a passion for it from a young age. I mean, I think for a long time I didn't think it was a realistic career path. I thought it was, this is going to be too hard to get into, and And I mean, without a bit of a circuitous route to get there, I finished school. I ended up doing a law degree, which I struggled my way through, and my marks were nothing to write home about. And probably pretty early on, I realized I didn't really want to go down that path properly.
Just a quick sidebar. We elected a president not too long ago who was not anywhere near the top of his law class either. But
I'm in good company then.
Oh, there you go. There you go.
Better than the last one. Look, it was a bit of a circuitous route to get there. After a couple of years of that, I sort of started, for want of a better term, dabbling a bit in sport media stuff. I started a bit like yourself with your initiative, and as I say to a lot of young or aspiring sports journalists or people who want to get into the industry, there's probably, everyone can do with a bit of luck and all that, but I think that the biggest thing you need is initiative. And so I started a website with a bunch of friends. Where we did a sort of a sports, it was a sort of a lighthearted sports commentary website. And that led to a bit of some writing for sort of a more mainstream website. And it's local sort of local level calling of games. In one respect, calling was actually almost probably more of my dream and passion at a younger age. But I enjoyed the writing as well, and got very lucky that I got recommended for a maternity leave position at the age when I was 23. Through someone I had been doing a bit of work with, and they put my name forward, and I was managed to be offered a job, and sort of tried to make the most of that, and feel very lucky to have been able to forge a reasonable career in the industry for what's coming up to about 8.5 years, the best part of a decade. So it's gone very quickly, and I still sort of pinch myself, but a real feel very lucky, and it's a real passion.
And I'm going to ask you where people can find your work now. That I have 3 real quick questions to wrap up with. Sure. So where can people find your work now, and tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. So as I said, I've been at the Age until late last year, and left there. And it was a tough call to leave there. I sort of love the Age. At one of sort of Melbourne's, Australia's great newspapers, and I still would recommend people read the Age. But I work now for a website called Code Sports. It started up late last year, so I was there from just before they launched. It's sort of been the pipeline for a few months before then. It's part of News Corp's sports offering. The company, I think, we're looking to sort of start a specialty subscription sports website, probably with a little bit similar to The Athletic. I mean, I'd be lying if it sort of was suggesting it was the size or scale of The Athletic, which obviously has beat writers across all of American professional sports teams and sizable footy in Europe. Clearly, there's not the scale here in a much smaller country, but it's a little bit like that. So we try to have a bit more, probably the site has a bit more of a, maybe a bit more of a considered longer form feel, not exclusively so. And, without the risk of sounding like doing a sales pitch, there's a lot there, both news, analysis, features. So opinion pieces, quite a wide range across all Australian sport, and then a bit of some global sport as well. So, as you sort of touched on at the start, I write about footy and cricket, the two sports. I mean, cricket obviously will be a bit more pretty foreign, I'd imagine, to the US audience, but those are sort of the two sports I cover closely and I'm passionate about, and touch a little bit on others. But yeah, so codesports.com.au. There's an app as well. Not sure if you need a Australian mobile number to sign up. I think
you do not. You don't, because I'm signed up and I didn't need one. Yeah. Okay. So three other quick questions for you. And there's this big push right now for a new club license in Tasmania. And I want it, based upon your biography, I want to know if you can get behind my proposal here. Okay, I know everybody's talking about the Tasmania Devils, but I'm thinking the Hobart Simpsons. What do you think? Because you basically said you're a frequent Simpsons quoter there, so I figured I should go ahead and ask you that. And while you're
Yeah,
thinking
no.
about that, what's your favorite episode?
Oh, yeah, it's like choosing which is your favorite child. There's so many. And I talk about Simpsons. Look, any Simpsons reference, I'd get behind. And I think in a weird way, I know it's not going to happen, but in a weird way, something like that would probably allow, and it'd be gimmicky, but it's probably not the market for it. If you had some sort of real weird market like that was not a footy heartland,
mm-hmm.
you could do something a bit like that. I mean, the Anaheim Ducks.
Right.
Ducks,
Yeah.
There is actually, and the AFL are shamelessly getting to bed with all sorts of companies. So it's not as
Marvel
ridiculous as it may. Exactly right. So, you'd never put. I mean, it would probably be a bit. People would. It'd be a laughing stock at some level. But my favorite episode. There's so many. I really like. I think I like Homer at Bat, the baseball episode. I think because of the sporting connections, a lot very quotable. I like 22 short stories about Springfield. There's a lot. There's a lot. I could, I need to go through a lot of the season 4 and 5 stuff is probably the best. But there's so many great episodes.
Yeah, and I know you have to jump to another meeting, but the last thing: will Bart ever get out of the 4th grade?
I wouldn't have thought so. It's interesting with the Simpsons. Like they're now getting to what are we, 33 seasons?
Something like that. Yeah, something like that.
I mean, if I'm being frank, I wouldn't have watched more than 1 or 2 new episodes in the last 10 years. Like you turn it on every now and again. It's just I don't really think. I think because some of the voice actors have changed, the writers have changed. It's not the same show. It probably hasn't been the same show since people say when it jumped the shark around the late 90s, even maybe if you give it a couple more years.
Okay.
Classics. I actually don't know anyone who still watches The Simpsons regularly in terms of new seasons. It's sort of you almost like you need a bit of cognitive dissonance to forget that they produced all these series that probably aren't early seasons that aren't particularly good, but the first decade was so good that it doesn't really matter. But
right.
Maybe I should give it maybe I should experiment and actually try to stomach some of the new stuff, but it's just not the same.
Okay. Well, Daniel, I thank you for your time this morning, sir. I know you've got to jump into another meeting right now, but I truly appreciate you taking time out of your morning, sir.
No, I appreciate it, Craig. Sorry I couldn't be on longer, but
no, that's okay. That's great.
Love to be back on another time, and all the best in Cats and great work with all you're doing in the US.
I appreciate it, sir. Thanks so very much. All right, ladies and gentlemen. Daniel, I want to thank you so very much, sir, for taking time out of your morning. I know you had a tight schedule. I appreciate you being able to squeeze me in there. We had a little bit of a glitch with regards to our connection, but we got it up and running. Now, folks, remember that you can find everything related to my podcast over at my website at yankonthefooty.com. You can get signed up on the mailing list so that when new episodes come out, they're in your inbox as soon as they come out. You can leave a review, which is a huge help to the show. It lets people know what you think of it, that I can then turn around and use that as a bit of free advertising, if you will, legitimacy, if you will, that other listeners are enjoying what they're hearing. And also, if you want to help out the podcast, there's the Buy Me a Coffee page. There, the little button in the bottom left-hand corner. You can check that out. My store page from Redbubble is there as well if you want to get a sticker. Would love to be able to share your photos of the stickers and such on the back windows of your ute or your car or whatever the case may be if you happen to have one there. Truly appreciate all the support, though, that I've been getting from everybody. Now, folks, I do hope that you will look out for one another, check in with your friends, give them a call, see how they're doing. I did see on Twitter earlier today, I'm recording this on Wednesday evening, my time, which is when I thought I was going to be doing another interview, and I screwed up and jotted down the wrong time. So, Michael, I apologize for that. But, folks, check up on your friends. Make sure they're okay. As I was saying, I did see somebody had posted that their place of business I believe in Victoria, was going back to a mask mandate. And they were not too terribly happy about this. Now, one little thing I did want to mention here, and you may have noticed if you've looked at the show notes for the podcast, and I hope you have, I do list at the bottom of each episode's show notes the help numbers for organizations like Beyond Blue, suicide prevention hotlines, things of that nature. Well, for here in the United States, I did want to mention that 4 days ago, the United States Department of Veterans Affairs did something that I'm absolutely thrilled about. Being a veteran myself, my son is a military member. You know, I know many, many people who are serving in the military or have served. They have added a streamlined suicide prevention hotline for military veterans and active duty military members. And what that number is, and I'll put that link in the show notes. If you're here in the United States and you need to talk to somebody, you can, on your phone, you can dial 988 and then press number 1. So you don't have to remember the other suicide prevention hotline number. It's 988 and press 1 to get you there. And like I said, I will put that information in the show notes. But again, folks, check up on with each other. Let everybody you know that you're okay, that you're looking out for them as well. I do appreciate all the kind words that I receive from all of you. This is still this labor of love that I'm absolutely enjoying. I'm very excited about the direction that the podcast is going, and I have lots of fun things lined up here in subsequent episodes. We've only got a few rounds of footy left, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So, folks, as always, may your dribble kick never hit that post. I will catch you later. This has been episode 188 of A Yank on the Footy. Don't forget that you can reach me by my website at yankonthefooty.com. You can also reach me at yankonthefooty@gmail.com. You can find me on Instagram. You can find me over there on Facebook. You can find me on Twitter at yank_on. I do hope that you'll reach out. I do hope that you'll share your favorite episode with your friends and family. I would love for you to share episode 186, the one about the birthday cards. If that would be a huge help, because we're trying to get as many of those as we possibly can for my mom's upcoming 80th birthday. Again, folks, thanks for listening. Please consider sharing the podcast with your friends and family. And until next time, this is Craig Wessels. Goodbye.